Hello everyone, this is Sandra talking to Wayne Boatwright today, who is the president of the Queensland Mycological Society. So I'm very excited to be talking to Wayne about fungi. No better topic to talk about. So Wayne, tell us everything about you.
Yeah. Everything about me. I like to keep busy. I like to do a lot of bushwalking, and I guess that's probably the way that I got into mycology. Is I spend a lot of time in nature, and you know, I went for a walk one day at one of my local reserves, Bennett Park, and we'd had about a week's worth of rain, and the place had transformed. All of a sudden, there were all of this sort of thing around the place, and I started to take a lot of photos, and I was like, wow, this must be a whole thing. So I hopped on the internet and I did a bit of groundwork on fungi and what the study is, and I thought, yeah, it is a whole thing, it's mycology. Then I went to a fungi festival that was held by Fungi Map, and I was working on spores under a microscope within hours, and then I joined the Queensland Mycological Society. I became treasurer and then president. And here I am today, showing my love of macrofungi and the study of mycology with people who have an interest and would like to turn their ear and have a listen about what it's all about, I suppose.
Yes, and when you were a child, Wayne, did you have you had already some interest in nature? Were you interested in particular things, or was that born later on in life?
Yeah, I think I used to spend a lot of time camping. So for me as a youngster on the Sunshine Coast, my friends and I would always, every single holiday we had would be a camping holiday. So we were always out and amongst nature. But I think like a lot of people, I think largely my education grew up around the original two kingdoms of plants and animals. So we understood a bit of botany and a bit of zoology, but we never knew anything about fungi at all. And up until my adult life, I thought fungi was just, you know, the mushrooms were just stuff that you bought at the supermarket and ate. I didn't understand that 10% of all life, of the biota, is fungi. And I didn't understand about the critical role and the interconnectedness of all living things and how fungi underpin the entire ecosystem.
Yes.
On the planet.
Yeah. So it was a real experience where you've actually seen a mushroom growing and it sparked your interest. And that's when you sort of started thinking, well, maybe I should get involved with fungi more because, like, what are these things?
Yeah, I guess a quality that I admire in people is being curious and engaged. And I guess I've always regarded myself as someone who is curious and engaged. And I find that when you're like that, when you are curious and engaged, you're open to learning and that sort of thing. So I became curious about fungi and mycology, and I engaged myself with it. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And what's so interesting about it is how little we know about mycology, about the fact that mycology is where botany was 150 years ago. So there's a lot of new information emerging out of the study of mycology, but there's so much more work to do. And that's a really valuable aspect of mycology, I think, is that you can make a difference in mycology because we need so many people to do so much more in terms of collecting knowledge and specimens and trying to help us understand this kingdom.
Yes.
Because as much as we think we know about mycology, we know very little.
That's right. And you've mentioned earlier that it's like the underpinning of all the ecosystems, pretty much fungi, you know, the mycelium network. So tell us a little bit more about this ecology that you've become fascinated by.
Well, I think, you know, like I mentioned, our original understanding, I think Linnaeus said there were two kingdoms originally. There was plants and animals. And then someone came along and said, hang on, there's a third kingdom. And there are 6 now, 6 kingdoms. But the third kingdom that came along was this kingdom of fungi. And they said, oh, there's this third thing. They're not plants, they're not animals, they're fungi, and they're recyclers. So there you go. Our initial understanding was that fungi play this role of recycling. And indeed, the forests would choke on their own timber timber is made of cellulose and lignin, which are really complex molecules. And fungi are pretty much, perhaps apart from a few cyanobacteria, fungi are pretty much the only organism that can comprehensively recycle timber and break it down. And so his original observation about fungi being recyclers was correct. And forests would literally choke on their own timber if it weren't for fungi, which break it down and turn it into humus and soil. But we now know that fungi play so many more roles and do so much more than simply recycling. They form symbiotic relationships with plants. They parasitize plants and insects. They live as endophytes in dormancy inside plants. And we don't really understand a lot of those relationships very well, but we're beginning to learn a lot about those relationships. We look at the recyclers, the different ways they break down timber, the mycorrhizal fungi and their symbiotic relationship with plants, how that is sometimes a happy and sometimes a not so happy relationship. We understand it's not so much simply a matter of plants having an accessory on their roots that provides them with additional nutrients. We now know that it's actually a reasonably complex arrangement where the fungi will negotiate nutrient exchange with the plants. So there's a lot more interesting things we're learning about what we understand fungi to do and the roles they play. Parasitic fungi are fascinating. They're not only a problem for us, but sometimes for plants and definitely for insects, but they're also fascinating as well too. And this is where you get an inkling of wondering about, are fungi sentient? When you look at the way a fungi will take over an insect, occupy the non-vital organs in the insect, assume control of its brain, and then make it climb up to an optimum height. And then it'll make the insect clamp on, and then the spores will erupt from its head through a fruiting body. Now that's pretty freaky stuff. That fungi is actually taking over consciousness of another animal. So are fungi sentient? Certainly the suggestion seems to be that they are, but we're not actually able to prove that, I don't think, at this early stage. But no one can watch the David Attenborough insect fungi on YouTube videos and not have their mind blown away. It's absolutely fascinating. And then there's the least understood of all fungi, you know, the endophytes that just live inside a tree. You know, mycologists refer to trees as fungi hotels. Fungi permeate all living trees and they exist inside them, and then all of a sudden the tree dies and their hotel's gone. They change roles, break down the timber and move on to a new host. What's that about? Is there a benefit for the tree? There's a suggestion now that there is a benefit for the tree, but we don't actually know that comprehensively because not enough studies have been done. So, you know, it's like turning the page on mycology, and the more you learn, the more you think, wow, there's so much more I need to learn, because we're just starting to understand the variety of roles of fungi. And now we're talking about dynamic fungi that's not just mycorrhizal, but mycorrhizal and endophytic. And saprophytic. So we're looking at the changing roles of fungi now. So we like to put them in these four distinct boxes, but now we understand an endophyte may move up and become a saprophyte, could be an endophyte for a period. But again, I can't speak about that with certainty. It's a suggestion at this stage, and there's so many suggestions and so much study that needs to be done in mycology. It's fascinating.
Yes, it is fascinating.
Listen to me bang on.
Yes, and you've mentioned, you know, this dynamic relationship, whether we often see things as parasites, and I feel sometimes, you know, we don't really know yet that a lot of these fungi are actually endophytic, and there's a big signaling between plants, and this language between plants and fungi is so not understood yet. And there's all sorts of language to be, you know, translated through science. And once again, that beautiful notion of not knowing and what's possible, and having, you know, predestined ideals, and not sort of experimenting further to find out the truth behind these relationships. I think that's what makes mycology, any science, such a fascinating endeavor.
Yeah, and that's it. That's what's really interesting, I think, too, about scientific studies, is that you always define yourself by what you don't know. Mycology is riddled with that. There's so much we don't know. And that makes the things that you do find out, and the things you do understand, and the things that we do learn all the more fascinating.
Absolutely. And tell us, Wayne, now that how long have you been a Queensland Mycological Society's president now? Like more than 2 years, right? Has it been 2 years yet?
Be about 3 years, I think.
Really?
2 to 3 years, yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I think so, yeah. I joined the society in 2014, I think it was. So
and what
the society's been going since 2005.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been going for 15 years now, which is good.
Yes. And what drove you to become the president, and also what is the Queensland Mycological Society?
So the Queensland Mycological Society is a group of citizen scientists and just sharing our knowledge of fungi. If I described our core business, it would be specimen collecting. So in the Queensland Herbarium, when I started out with the society, there were 1,500 fungal specimens and probably about 10,000 or more plant specimens. So if you do the maths and you say roughly each plant should have maybe 4 to 6 fungal partners, that means if fungi were properly described, those 1,500 specimens should be more in the number of 45,000. So that tells you how poorly described fungi is. So if I said our core business is specimen collecting, that means we have permits in place with national parks and with local authorities, and we go around to natural areas and reserves and we document the biodiversity of fungi. So each year or each month when we go back to these reserves, we observe what fungi are there. If it's interesting and it's a good specimen, we'll collect a physical specimen, process it, and it will be stored in the herbarium. And we try and build on that knowledge and basically put more dots on the maps of the Atlas of Living Australia. In the ALA, you'll see little dots everywhere for the dispersal of fungi. And we're just trying to put more dots on the map. Mm-hmm. And this knowledge, this base of knowledge, lends itself to conservation efforts. Over a period of time, we can assert that a fungi is in decline or non-existent or extinct, and we could assert conversely that a fungi is a pest or a weed, and that it's a problem for us. But without that body of knowledge, we can't make those conservation efforts. So last year we put about 12 species on the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Red List, mm-hmm. Which was a significant thing to do for us, we think, for fungi. And there were other species put on that red list by other countries, and they now have quite a number of species on the red list. So the red list is basically a list of threatened or endangered species. And we think that list needs to include fungi. It includes animals, it includes plants, but there's never been enough fungi on that red list. But certainly some fungi are rare and threatened, vulnerable. We think some fungi are now extinct. So that's the interesting end of it. But before we can make assertions in that field about the conservation status of fungi, we need broader knowledge. We need to know what is where. And this is why we not only collect specimens, but we engage with people through social media. We encourage them to share what they see out there. I always say to people, do you photograph fungi? And the answer is consistently yes. Mm. And I say to these people, if you take a photograph of a fungus, if you hop on social media and give me a date and a location with that photo, that's now a piece of data. Mm-hmm. And you are now a citizen scientist. Mm. So people are one step away from making meaningful change to the science of mycology. And it's not just sharing the image online, but giving us a date and location on our Facebook page or SEQ Fungi or any of the mycology pages. And what's powerful to understand is there are very keen mycologists with eyes all over those pages. And as soon as something interesting pops up, you will know in a heartbeat whether or not it's worth collecting, because I think 3 or 4 times this year and the last year and the year before that, someone's posted something on Facebook and we've run out the doors to go and collect this specimen because it's of mycological interest. Never before seen, a new species, some we've not seen here before. So that's what we do. We encourage people to collaborate through social media. If they want to be more involved, they can join our society. We have interesting talks once a month. And we go out and we collect specimens routinely for the herbarium in order to build on that knowledge base. So that's us as a society.
Yes, it's certainly a very fantastic society, and there's so much knowledge to be shared. And you know, from the meetings that I have attended in person, there's always been wonderful information, something new to learn. Scientists, you know, that deal with fungi, always talking about something wonderful and new. And I think now, with, you know, the fact that we're sort of not so social anymore in person for a while, it's a good opportunity actually to, you know, record these meetings. And I'm sure you guys are doing that right now as well, just to get more exposure about fungi. I think it's invaluable that this information is available widely and even on social media. You know, I know it's great to, of course, it'd be wonderful to have people join the society and support it. Obviously, nothing works without the income. But I also think more and more people are actually, you know, freely sharing information about fungi and their ecological roles, their roles in psychiatric research, their roles in, you know, plant health. So many things are coming out, and I think the Mycological Society is just something that's going to one day become very, very popular. And that's my, you know, fervent hope, because I absolutely adore the fact that fungi knowledge is being finally shared.
Yes, yes, and that's what we're all about, sharing knowledge. I think being a financial member of our society is really about specimen collecting. So if you wanted to go into a national park and operate under a permit, you need to be a member. That's what that's about. We try and keep it cheap. Our annual membership is $25, and we do that so people can participate, and they can do it for a very modest sum and make real change to mycology if they're so inclined. And for that too, you get discounts. We do a calendar every year that we give away to our members, a bit of fun. And it's great to be a part of something, I think, too, and it really can lend meaning to your life. And the people in our society are very interesting as well too. We have a depth of, I think our youngest member is 8 years old and our oldest member is over 80. So we have a real interesting profile of membership as well too. So, but it's a great social thing. This year we had a fungi feast and a weekend away. Hopefully next year again we'll be able to do that once more. But there's all that sort of participation that you get from being part of society too.
Yes, and meeting wonderful people and having lots of fun on these forays that we go out on. In terms of collecting permits, tell me more about this. How can, how does collection happen, and what is the actual law behind collecting fungi?
Okay, so you can do what you like on your own private property. But if you want to collect fungi in a national park, then of course you need to be properly permitted. There are also protocols you need to follow. So if you wanted to be a specimen collector, we bring you on board, we give you all of the guidelines, we issue the permits, we provide you with all of the knowledge you require so that what you do is legal and ethical. Because if I found an interesting specimen in a national park and I just ripped it out of the ground and took it to the herbarium, if it wasn't collected legally, it's a useless specimen. It's what they call a pirate specimen, and it can't be traded under the Nagoya Protocol that now exists. You probably also look at a fine of about $50,000 for disturbing a national park. So you have to be very careful and very cautious. And, but of course, legal and ethical collection, that's a whole conversation. And we have that conversation with people when they come on board. Do you want to be a specimen collector? We would then record you as a research assistant, send you out into the field. And the good thing we have is we have our annual monthly forays, but we've now got people adopting their local parks, which is a really good thing for us. They just adopt their local park and go out routinely, even weekly, and document what they see there. And they share it online, and if it's interesting, they collect the specimen, dry it, and it gets stored at the herbarium as a scientific record. And those scientific records are really, really valuable.
So once a
for future mycological work.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like sort of explaining to people a little bit is a good thing, to explain what, what does it take to do a collection? Like, it's not just picking the fungi and dropping it off at the herbarium. There are several processes involved, aren't there, in order for a good specimen, worthy of a collection.
Yeah, and again, we run a workshop in January every year, because generally fungi appear between January to July when there's a lot of rain. So the season begins around January, February, but if there's been rain, it can be any time of year really. So every January we hold a workshop on specimen collecting, and we tell you all about the permits, all about the processing. If I was going to collect this fungi here, you know, I'd dig it up, I'd get pictures of the top side, the underside, I'd put a number in the photo and get a sense of scale. I want GPS coordinates. Then I take the specimen home and I try and obtain a spore print. Then I process the specimen on a dryer. Drying is our preferred method of preservation. I dry at 45 degrees for about 12 hours. And then once the specimen's dry, I bag it all up with some silica gel, the spore print, and the data sheet. And the data sheet has all of the images, the GPS coordinates. It tells you information about the spore colors, you know, the color of the spore print, and any other thing that you would find out in the field from the fresh specimen that you couldn't tell from it dried, how it might smell, whether or not it bruised. You know, you just basically gather as much information as you can, put it all on the sheet. Interestingly enough, identifying the fungus is not critical for specimen collecting. We just want you to grab the specimens, take the notes, and deliver them to the herbarium. The taxonomists will do the body of work with regards to identification. But if you like to have a go, that's usually a fun thing to do too. I usually put my stuff online, throw it out to the experts and get a few opinions about what I found, and find out they're all wrong when I take it to the senior botanist at the mycology at the herbarium.
Yeah. And tell us, Wayne, how many people are actually there, like as in actual paid taxonomists of fungi in Australia?
Two, one?
Yes.
I think a lot of them are primarily botanists, and a lot of the time gets taken up in botany. And occasionally they get to work in mycology as well too. So I think maybe there's one person in Melbourne, maybe Dr. Tom May would be, but again, I don't know that his primary focus is mycology. I think he might also be a botanist. So I don't know that there are many people, and that's a real problem for us, I guess, is that the body of work in mycology gets done by citizen scientists, and there are very few really good taxonomic people in this country who are paid to do the work. And quite often they're very busy. So at the top end of things with the taxonomists, it's like a little butter thinly spread over too much bread. Yes. In the words of Tolkien, there's just not enough work in mycology, which is a great tragedy. There should be more paid mycologists. There should be more funding provided to mycological work, to taxonomy, to the study of mycology, but there isn't. So, yes, so we rely heavily on citizen scientists to do the body of work, and then the few experts that we do have to do research and taxonomy. And
yes, and I think this is, you know, this is where we probably need, we just probably have to sort of, the more that citizen scientists become interested, that will probably help people to take up mycology and taxonomy in the future, you know. And I think, you know, the Queensland Mycological Society being the body that it is, and so inclusive of everyone, and I think, you know, just that in itself brings people in, and the younger generations can therefore, if we start introducing the concept of mycology to younger people, especially in school levels as well, I feel like that's going to eventually lead to a great change in this scientific study of mycology.
Yes, I think the way forward is we have people moving into the society, quite often retirees, sometimes not, and taking on a genus or a type of fungus, maybe doing a PhD in one area or another. So we get these little pockets of excellence and pockets of knowledge. You know, we get a marasmius expert, we get an agaricus expert, a polypore expert, and we certainly have those around the place. There's not many people who have a really broad, comprehensive knowledge of all of the types of fungi. Maybe 2 or 3 people in Australia, and that's probably the way forward, is to, if you want to pursue a knowledge of mycology, pick up a genus and run with it. Galerina, hygroside. Usually someone's done the work before, but then you could, and that seems to be the way forward with taxonomy is for people to specialize or to pick up a particular genus or a particular morpho group of fungi and focus their attention on that and become experts in that area. So we have these fungi gurus around the place, and if I want to know something about a polypore, I quite often send my material to Matt Barrett up in North Queensland, or if it's a marasmius question, I'll go to Francis Gard, and if it's an agaricus question, it's someone else. And but there are very few people. Nigel Fechner, Tom May, probably if you have any question, they might be able to answer a broader question, but there's not many people who can do that. So we have these contacts around the place that we deliver specific questions to. We have our little gurus around the place, and that seems to be the way of it right now.
Yeah. And in terms of sorry, there's a bit of a delay. In terms of how does Australia compare to other countries in terms of mycology, in terms of the research that we do and the taxonomy of our fungi? Are we pretty behind the rest of the world, would you say, or are fungi so dismissed all over the world?
Yes, in a word, yes. I'd say the ones doing the best and the most work would be China, and I think in South America, certain countries have made leaps forward in the study of fungi, certainly in the recognition of the kingdom of fungi. The Conservation Act here still refers to the kingdom of plants and animals. It doesn't even refer to fungi as a kingdom. So even our legislation's kind of far behind. And what's the impact of that? The impact of that is when you do, say, an environmental impact study, you might have to do, under the Act, a survey of plants and animals. When in fact, if we're going to have a look at the environmental impact of developing a site or putting a wastewater treatment plant somewhere, we should really understand the complete picture of the site that we're impacting. And the complete picture of the site would include a description of the fungi that's there, not just of the plants and animals. And this is what they learned over in, I think it was Peru. As soon as they broadened the terminology of the legislation, all of a sudden their environmental impact studies had to change, because they needed to know what fungi was there, whether or not it was threatened. And so that was good, really, because when the legislation changed, jobs were created for mycologists. And that's where we have to move forward with. We have to change our understanding, broaden our legislation, specifically identify fungi as a kingdom, and include it in environmental impact studies, that sort of thing. So there's legislative framework which needs changing. There's conceptual framework within the government. There's funding that needs to occur. We're not doing enough, not by a long shot. I don't think we will be for a while. Hence the need for citizen science and citizen scientists to rise to the front or float to the top and do the work that's required. Without them, fungi would be still in the dark ages. It still is, really.
Yes, and I think it's a beautiful opportunity, isn't it, really? And what would you say to encourage people to pick up mycology to become sort of citizen science mycologists, or amateur, as we call people that haven't got a degree, because we don't need a degree, right? This is the whole thing. We could become scientists in the field of mycology just by actually joining the society and doing some work with it.
That's right. Now, I understand that people get into fungi for a variety of reasons. We find them, they like to photograph fungi, as Paul Valier did with this beautiful image. This is a Paul Valier image. And so we have a lot of photographers. We have mycophages, people who like to eat fungi. And we eventually find that people come into trying to understand the broader science as well. And that's where and I would just encourage people to get on board, investigate, read a book about fungi, any book. And before you know it, you just get bit by the bug and you're into it. And people get into their own thing, their own way. A lot of people like to cultivate fungi. Some people like to photograph them. There are a lot of aspects of fungi. It doesn't have to be the broader science, but there is an aspect of mycology that will fascinate you. So I encourage people just to get on board for that reason.
Yes, very fun thing to do. You definitely can catch the bug, the fungi bug, get infected by the mycelial thread. And yeah, and so many more prominent mycologists around the world are now speaking up and really becoming sort of a, gurus in the field of mycology, and they themselves, a lot of them have not had background training. So it just shows that this field is so fluid in the sense, because of the lack of funding and because of the lack of, I guess, mycology being even taught at universities at any of the levels of sort of biological endeavor. I think that creates this potential where citizen scientists can really make a big difference, and we encourage that, right? We just want people to get involved and have as much fun with it as possible, and at the same time contribute to science.
That's right. So I always say to people, what I do on the weekend when I'm out in the bush hunting for fungi and collecting specimens, it's like a treasure hunt with meaningful science attached to it. So it's fun, it's easy, it's interesting, and forget, I hate to say it, but forget your knitting or your needlework. Let's do a hobby that has meaning. Let's do a hobby that has meaningful science attached to it, and it's just great. It's a great buzz too when you're out in the field, find a new specimen, or just the idea that you're contributing to the body of scientific knowledge is a wonderful idea. And it's, if you're looking for validation or meaning, it's here in buckets. Get on board and get out and collect some specimens with us.
Yay! Thanks so much, Wayne. If there's anything else you'd like to say it. Otherwise, we'll cut it here because we've had a lovely chat already. But also,
why was the mushroom the life of the party?
Because he was a fun guy. Is that right?
Fun guy. Boom.
Why couldn't the mushroom? No, I spoiled the joke. I was going to tell you a joke, but I spoiled it. But nonetheless, thank you so very much for your contribution to the Discovery Lab that, we're running this series with various scientists and various experts. So thank you for being one of them, and we really appreciate this, and I really look forward to your presentation as well. Thanks, Wayne.
No worries, thanks. Bye now.
I can't stop recording. Stop.